Hello. So, as I mentioned in my last video, I really wanted to do a spoiler-filled review of The King of Crows, which is the final novel in the Diviner series. Here it is! So, this is going to be a rant review filled with spoilers. So, if you haven't read the series, I'm going to do like a brief synopsis, mostly focused on the characters, my favorite part of the series at the beginning, and then I'll get into the spoilers. So if you want to kind of check it out and see if you want to read the series or if you just want to dive into the spoilers, you can make that choice. I have a lot of thoughts on how this series ended. But before we get into those thoughts, let me give you a brief overview of what the Diviner series is about. So it focuses on this group of kids, really like late teens, who for some reason have these powers, like small-ish magical powers. They have their limitations, but still magic and pretty cool. And they're all brought together by the shared powers that they have, and they're trying to figure out why they have them, what their link is, and at the same time also trying to figure out how they're gonna save the world from these big evil baddies. And it's also set in 1920s New York, and the setting is gorgeous. For the first 3 books, you get to explore different boroughs, different parts of New York City, like Harlem and also Chinatown in the second book, which was so cool to see. And it felt alive. Like the way Libba Bray described these settings was really good. It was one of the highlights of the whole series. So these kids are running around New York, fighting ghosts, dealing with eugenicists and stuff. And, you know, they have to work together. They have to learn how to like each other, how to interact with each other. There's a lot of good banter. It's really fun stuff. Let's get into the first part of this video, characters. This is not... The following is an incomplete list of the characters. There are definitely more involved, especially as the series goes on, but these are the main characters for the majority of the series. Let's start with Evie O'Neill. She can be considered the main character of the whole series. She's originally from like a small town in Iowa, gets in trouble there, partially based on her object reading abilities. She gets shipped off to her uncle in New York, where she lives now. She's also dealing with the loss of her brother from World War I, and she self-medicates with booze. She's a bit arrogant, but very lovable still. Next is Mabel Rose. She is Evie's best friend and kind of like her polar opposite. She's very smart, a feminist, a revolutionary, and she's very interested in helping those less fortunate than herself. And she also has an unrequited love in the group. That's a thing. Sam Lloyd, he is another diviner. He can kind of make himself appear invisible to other people. He is a Jewish immigrant. He's a bit of a loner and a very charming grifter that meets Evie on her first day in New York. Theda Knight is another girl originally from the Midwest who moved to the big city to make herself into a star. She is one of the Siegfried girls, a flapper, very fashionable, very chic. She also has the ability to create fire, like from her hands. And as part of her backstory, she's also an escaped abuse victim who has to constantly look behind her shoulder to make sure she's not being followed. Henry Dubois, he is introduced as Theda's best friend. He is a very funny gay musician, originally from New Orleans. He ran away from home because they were verbally abusive and didn't really approve of his lifestyle. His diviner power is that he can walk through people's dreams while he's dreaming. Jericho Jones. I had no idea Jones was his last name until I looked it up because I couldn't care less. Jericho is my least favorite character by far. Like, I understand his role in the group, but I'd be okay if he wasn't in the story. He is a survivor of an intense childhood illness. He also has an unrequited love in the group. He's a big ol' nerd, which is cool. And he's strong. He's very strong. That's kind of his thing. But he's also pretty boring. Memphis Campbell. He is the Harlem healer. That is his diviner ability. He is a very sweet poet, and he's also dealing with the consequences of dating a white woman while black. Isaiah Campbell. Oh, he is Memphis's adorable, snarky little brother. His diviner power is that he gets visions of the future that he has to like decipher and stuff. He's only like 10, 11 years old. He's precious. Ling Chan. She is probably my favorite character in the whole series, and she wasn't introduced until like the second book. But her power is that she can meet dead people in her dreams. So it's kind of very similar to Henry's dream walking ability. And because of this, you know, in part, they become really close friends and have a very good bond, and I love them very much. Ling is a daughter of an Irish and Chinese immigrant. She lives in Chinatown and helps her parents in their Chinese restaurant. Due to a childhood illness that inflicted paralysis on her, she has to walk with leg braces. She is also ace, so asexual, but into women, so cool representation there. She's always a bit grumpy, loves science, and is also always a bit sassy. I love Ling very much. I wish we had her from the beginning, but that's okay. Book number 2 is still my fave. And then finally we have Will Fitzgerald. He is Evie's uncle. He runs the Museum of the Occult that never has any money, always owes taxes. Very much a scholar. And when Evie moves in with him and finds all these other diviner people, he is forced to kind of wrangle everyone together and try to figure out a way to save the world. Okay, that was not very brief at all. Okay, that was my attempt at a very quick run through of the characters and, you know, a little piece of each of them. I love them all very much, especially when they're all together. Caution! If by now you think you are interested in reading the series, stop here. Go ahead, read books 1 through 3, take your time, enjoy them. And if at the end of 3 you feel like you want to read book 4, go for it. I'm not gonna stop you. I don't necessarily think you need to read every single one of those pages. Honestly, if you really enjoyed books 1 through 3, maybe think about reading a spoiler review, a brief summary of it, and then maybe see if you want to read it. I don't know. Up to you. But if you would like to continue, the rest of the video is going to be spoiler territory. As a continuation of the characters, so book 3 ends in Will's murder by the Shadow People, the like federal agents that are trying to hunt down the diviners. And the beginning of the 4th book, there is like no, they do not talk about Will's death like at all. Like you would think Evie, like yeah, she and her uncle were on rough terms by the time of his death, but like he's still her uncle. She doesn't talk about him at all. And she ends up being the one to tell Jericho, who was basically like a son to Will, about his death. And instead of like showing how he would react to this news, it fades to black. And you just kind of imagine how Jericho would have reacted. Okay. And then pretty early on in the book, all the diviners get split up into 3 groups. Like 4 books, like 3 whole books, they were apart and only together for brief moments in time. And then finally at the end of book 3, you have the entire group together, working on their powers, and it was wonderful. And then what does Libba Bray do? Tears them apart for 300 pages. It makes no sense. This is the final book. This is where you should be getting the most out of these characters that you've built up over 3 books. You should get, like, it just makes no sense to me. There's much less of that amazing banter that we had in the previous books. And then when they finally get reunited, it's all happiness and joy for about like 10 seconds until they're thrown into the next fight and have to deal with the aftermath of that, and that rolls into the climax. there's like no time to revel in these wonderful characters. I guess I did like what she did with Evie's grieving process with Mabel. So at the end of the third book, Mabel finds herself in a bad group of folks, some anarchists who decide to bomb this, was it a science fair? It was like some exhibition, Jake Marlowe's exhibition, and ends up killing the like saintly Sarah Snow. Mabel tried to stop them. She really did. She didn't want violence. That wasn't her goal. She just wanted to help people. But she was killed in the blast, and people like of the people of New York have named her as one of the terrorists. And it's really hard on Evie. Like, she was her best friend, and yeah, they had grown apart a little bit in the last book, but she still loved her. And while I wish she wasn't dead, but I guess dealing with her ghost in maybe a not super logical way was still a nice way to have her in this book. I'm mad that Lang and Henry basically didn't talk for the entire book. Like, they maybe had like a few lines between them, but their friendship was honestly the best in the entire series. I loved them so much. Like, they were just like, in so many ways, each other's other half, and but no, they ended up in different groups. Ling was stuck with Jericho for the whole time. Another thing that confused me was the seemingly empty relationships that were included in this one. Besides the relationships between the diviners themselves, like Theta and Memphis, they had good stuff going on in here. Evie and Sam had great stuff going on in here, but the like side character significant others didn't really have a lot to do in here, especially David. I'll get to him in a sec. I was mostly happy seeing Ling and Alma figure out what they are together. So like I said, Ling is ace, so she's not interested in sex. Like, she seems to be down with kissing, and like, you know, whatever, that's totally up to her. And Alma seems to want more than that, but it's, you know, after conversations and time and figuring out what they each want out of the relationship, it seems like at the end they figured it out and are together and happy with each other, and that's fantastic. Like, this is the sort of representation and character development and interactions that make me really enjoy this series. But then we have an example of a relationship that did not need to happen. So when everyone is split up, Lang and Jericho end up together, and they are traveling with Alma's traveling all-female band, which is really fun. And one of the members in this band, Lupe, for some reason, ends up with Jericho. At this point, Jericho is still trying to get over Evie. I'll get to that in a sec. And just, like, okay, maybe he's cute, but like, he's so boring and lame, and I'm not even saying this just because he's a nerd. He just sucks. But because everyone needs to end up in a relationship, apparently, he gets together with Lupe and they have a fling or whatever. But back to Jericho and Evie. So the two of them had a thing. They like kissed and kind of liked each other in one of the earlier books, but it didn't work out for them. That's fine, because I'm definitely an Evie Sam shipper. I understand that it can take time to deal with the feelings you have for someone, especially when that relationship doesn't work out. But like, dude, get over it. She clearly is into Sam. You two are not right for each other, but like, he will not let this go. Like, for so many books, he just keeps carrying that torch for Evie, and it culminates in the third book when he's like at Jake Marlowe's mansion. So Jake Marlowe is the inventor of this super serum thing that is basically keeping Jericho alive and also gives him his super strength. And I don't remember the details, but at one point, Evie and the other diviners are up at this mansion at the same time when Jake Marlowe is experimenting with this high dose, whatever, of the super serum. and he gives it to Jericho, and it makes him go ballistic, including actions that lead to him almost sexually assaulting Evie. Luckily, he's stopped, and I understand that it was mostly the serum's fault, but it was still his doing. It was his actions. He traumatized Evie. But like, I was expecting him to, apologize, understand that it was still his doing, realize that he needed to peace out of there and leave her alone. But he didn't. He stuck around. Not only that, like, yes, he probably still has an important role in the group, but even after all this, he's still pining for Evie and making it known. He's not keeping it a secret. And that's fucked up. Like, she clearly is uncomfortable to be anywhere near him. And still, that doesn't force him to like change how he's expressing his emotions and feelings. Like, dude, if you care about this girl so much, why the hell are you making her uncomfortable with your feelings? Like, keep it in, dude. I'm mad. One of the things that I did enjoy in this book was that Sam and Evie got engaged. It was really cute. Although it did kind of come out of nowhere, and it was literally like 5 pages of text. Like, you have 300 pages to work with of like filler. Oh, we're with the circus. But you don't spend any significant time on this like massive relationship thing that you've been building up for 4 books. Anyway, once their engagement is announced to the Diviners group, Jericho is visibly bummed because he's an idiot. And Evie feels so bad for him that she like takes him out on the porch, like to talk with him one-on-one and basically apologize for getting engaged to Sam. And at this point, Jericho is already in a relationship with Lupe, but still is in love with Evie, even after he traumatized her. He does not deserve any of this kindness, and yet Evie does it anyway. Like, he sucks ass. And I'll leave it there. Okay, I'm done harping on the characters. Let's move on to the setting. So like I said, for really only the beginning of the book are we actually in New York City. They end up going to this memorial for Sarah Snow that is held by Jake Marlowe. He like personally invited them. He's the villain. They've been fighting him for like 3 books. Why they all decided like, no, we're gonna trust him and we'll go. No idea. Anyway, they all end up there, and as Jake Marlowe is on the podium talking to this massive crowd of people, he points them out and says, hey, they're evil, we need them arrested, they're terrorists, othering them to the extreme. And it puts them in harm's way, and this like causes them to disperse and break off into those 3 groups. I don't understand why they didn't choose to like group up in, I don't know, anywhere somewhat close by, but still like far enough away from the city that they're okay for a little bit, and so they can like regroup and decide what their plan is. But no. Up until then, they were deciding whether or not they should go to Nebraska, because Isaiah has been in contact with this creepy little girl, Sarah Beth, who is out in Nebraska and is trying to convince them all to come to her because she knows how to defeat the King of Crows. Fantastic! Except they have like no reason to trust her, and they just decide, all right, instead of regrouping anywhere nearby, they're going to truck it all the way to Nebraska. In between chapters focusing on the characters, we also get glimpses at what is happening throughout a variety of small towns across the US. And it's like the King of Crows rolls in and basically turns it to dust, which is sad. A lot of people are dying, but we have no pre-existing connections to these towns, and it's seemingly out of nowhere. I don't know, it's just hard to emotionally connect to these losses. So instead of the lively and bustling New York City, we get three smaller, more intimate settings. And I understand the idea behind putting them in a more intimate environment to promote more character interactions and like deeper talks. But that doesn't really happen. Like every once in a while, yes, but like it still took so much time to get through these small settings and interactions. It doesn't make any sense. It did not need to be 300 pages. It could have been 100 pages with 200 other pages devoted to more interesting things. The settings that we get to see is a traveling circus. Sam used to be a traveling aerialist, which, you know, that was pretty cool. The other group, like I said, Ling and Jericho are with Alma's traveling band, and then Henry and Memphis, they are in a group that gets stuck in this town along the Mississippi River that is flooding, and all of the rich white folk get to leave, but the like rulers of the town are forcing all the black folk to stay back, sandbagging to protect their houses. Yeah, I like that it got to highlight some of the like pretty intense racism and classism seen in all, you know, just the US. But again, all of this could have taken much less time when more time should have been devoted to the characters as an entire group together. The KKK also got brought into this, understandably, you know, they were an issue during the time. I kind of expected them to be a bigger threat than they actually were. They seemed to be all bark and no bite. Theda's ex-husband is in league with them and trying to like get her away from her black boyfriend. And when they finally like find them on the farmhouse, there's a bit of conflict, but it's like, it's over in like 2 minutes. So I don't know, just the pacing doesn't really make sense. And then the final point for the setting, the climax happens in this random desert, either like state or national park. And yeah, the setting looks really cool, but again, there is no pre-established connection with this location and the characters. Part 3, the plot. I have a couple issues. There were some things, again, it's mostly back to the pacing. At the end of book 3, Sam was kidnapped by the Shadow Men and taken to Jake Marlowe's mansion. And he's like being used as like a battery thing for the eye, the portal into this other world that Jake is trying to get into for power reasons. And I think it was like Evie, Theda, and little Isaiah who are the ones to drive out to the mansion and rescue him, which is fine. I'm okay with him getting out early on in the story. But the issue is, it was way too easy. So apparently the only sort of bodyguards on the premises were the 2 Shadow Men, and they were busy dealing with another kidnapped person that they've had. It was actually Sam's mom. They were dealing with her. And no one was guarding Sam, so they basically just walked in, grabbed Sam, walked out. All right. Okay, this one really confused me. Adorable little Isaiah is murdered in this book. And honestly, it was devastating. That was like the most intense emotion that was brought out from me in this entire book. And I was like, damn, this went to some dark places. Because again, he's 11. He's just a small child who was very trusting, and he got murdered for it. And Memphis was obviously taking it really, really badly. So the entire series has harped on the idea that you should not ever try to resurrect the dead. It's never gonna go right. It's a horrible idea. For example, old Miss Addie and her zombie Confederate fiance. Bad idea. There's so many examples of why resurrection is a bad idea, and yet Isaiah comes back to life. He resurrects himself just because he can. I think the reason given was he was able to write his own history, and therefore he deserves to be alive again. I don't know. Nothing previously suggested that Isaiah was super like powerful, or he was like a chosen one or anything. He goes to the land of the dead because he's dead. He fights the King of Crows. We'll talk about that later. And he comes back to life because he wills it so. He's like writing his own history. Like, why does that make it okay? His mother was waiting there for him. She was, that could have been a very touching reunion and like kind of made his death a little bit better. But no, in this one case, resurrection was totally okay and it had no consequences. And then with the climax, the diviners are all like hooked up together by Jake Marlowe, and he forces them to turn on the eye, the portal to this other dimension, the dimension of the King of Crows. And this was their time to shine, because for like the past book and a half, they have been working together to figure out how their powers work, how they can defeat the ghosts. Because like for the longest time, they only really thought that their powers, when combined, were able to like atomize the ghosts. But they learned that they can combine their powers like individually to do some like pretty interesting combinations, like combining fire with healing or, something like that. And I think that would have been really cool to see, like, taking it to the max, like what they all could do. And I expected that coming into this climax, but there was like 2 smallish instances of that, or about, around there. And it was blown past. Like there was barely any screen time given to their powers and them working together. Like why? Why spend all this time and putting this much importance on them working together to barely even mention it in the height of the entire series? Makes no sense. And then I did like that Jericho just fucking dies. Like, I guess it was pretty cool that he like used his body and strength to shield everyone else from the massive explosion of the portal. I don't know. It was fine. It's fine. Yeah, most of my issue with the plot is coming from the settings and like these completely illogical choices. I don't get it. Part 4, the villains. So this book kind of had like 4 different villains. I already talked about Theta's ex-husband and the KKK. They were basically nothing. Sarah Beth. So she's the creepy little kid who Isaiah was having like dream conversations with, who convinced everyone to go out to Nebraska. She was working with the King of Crows this entire time. So all the diviners thought that she had Isaiah's power, that she was able to see the future. No! In fact, she could just communicate with the King of Crows. That was like her power. And she fell in love with him, was obsessed with him, and wanted to become his bride, and I guess thought that bringing all the diviners to him as like a sacrifice would do the trick. She was the one who just straight up murdered Isaiah. Like, so the way she's described in the book, it sounds like she's a creepy little like 10-year-old kid. She's 15. Like, maybe there's some medical reason why she's tiny and frail and weird. I don't know. They trusted her way too easily. Like, okay, I understand if it's just through the dreams of Isaiah, they could think that she could be trustworthy. But as soon as they met her, why weren't red flags going off? Like, why did they stay there? It wasn't a shock to me as the reader to figure out, oh no, she's actually evil the whole time. Yeah, I kind of saw that coming. It wasn't the twist that I think Libba Bray wanted it to be. And then the King of Crows himself. So I think since the end of the first book, he has been foreshadowed as this super scary, all-powerful creature coming from this other dimension to devour our world. But like, it seems to be the case where it was all tell and no show. Like, we keep getting told about how scary and powerful he is. And we have some instances of him showing his power, like bringing Addie's Confederate fiance back to life as a zombie to like torment her, and cursing Memphis and Isaiah's mom to be his like servant for all time. But like, I don't think he kills anyone himself. Like, he can raise the dead. Like, he has an entire army of like ghost zombie things, and they can murder people. But I don't know, he just seems like a shadow of a villain instead of like a full force evil being. The diviners were finally gonna face the King of Crows, this big baddie, the final fight scene. And it's not even a fight. So the actual fight against the King of Crows, it's not an actual fight. So instead of getting to see any of the diviners get to use their powers against him, it ends up being Isaiah by himself in like the land of the dead, facing down the King of Crows, and he defeats him with an insult. So the King of Crows has this like cape thing, cloak, I don't know. He opens up a side of it and asks people to stare into it. And it's like a bunch of feathers and weirdness. And that's kind of his way of trapping you. And when Isaiah looks into it, he is able to see past all the feathers and the magic and see that there's nothing there. The King of Crows is no one. He is nothing. He doesn't have his own history. He just takes the history of others. And this allows, I don't even fully understand how the King of Crows is defeated. Like, making him realize that he is nothing but a pile of feathers turns him into that? I don't know. And just like that, the King of Crows is dead. He's gone. So is his army of the dead. And Isaiah is able to will himself back into the land of the living just because. I was so shocked to learn that that was the real ending of this 4-book series that I love so very much. It hurt. I was mad, but mostly I was sad. I'm lucky. I started reading this series about a year ago, so, you know, I haven't been waiting for this finale for 10 years like some other readers had been. And yet, it's still so disappointing. Like, I think that the first 3 books are still worth rereading. I probably need some time to like heal from this 4th book, but it didn't completely ruin the series for me. But man, really? That's what we got? It honestly doesn't even feel like the same writer wrote this compared to the other 3. Like, maybe it was rushed, maybe she just ran out of steam. I don't know, but it doesn't feel real. And that's a big old bummer. I'm sure I missed some stuff. I read this about a month ago, still mad about it, but I kind of do feel a little bit better now that I was able to just kind of rant about it. Hopefully you enjoyed at least part of this rant. Maybe it convinced you that you actually want to read this series. I don't know. Yeah, it's gonna take some time to recover from this, but I guess it was worth it. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next one.